I'm sure I'll get a ballpoint pen in my box. All right. No, that was actually very nice. So, a couple things. And first off, so today at lunch. And you did one of those that's easy to do. You get me like 4 or 5 minutes.
Oh yeah.
I know. They start snowballing. And that's the thing. That's why if you miss one or you're not sure, put a mark and move on.
Yeah.
So, because it messes you up if you miss one. Yeah.
And then I can't be myself.
All right. So let me look at this. Are we recording? We're going live, people. Coast to coast for your dining and or dancing pleasure. Just 1 sec. Thank goodness that update did that. Yeah.
What is your least favorite food?
My least favorite food? Wow, what a question. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to whip you up some liver and horseradish. I don't like any kind of liver. I don't like horseradish. I don't like green peppers. Yeah. Those are good. Do you? Yeah. Like horseradish, I think it's the most vile thing in the world, and some people just love it. So, you know, I know some people love it. Awful. All right. Horseradish is a vile weed. Anybody who likes horseradish, there's something wrong with it. All right, so real quick. So today at lunch, I will go for everything I can possible on page 11. I will go through everything fast, but I'll go through it. And so since that is new for everybody, I will give you this benefit, even though it was for homework. Secondly, a lot of you have been there for review sessions, and I know there's a lot of conflict. I understand that, but I go through a lot, and it does help a lot. The big thing is when you come to that test, there's just so much information. If you feel confident, like, okay, I know this material. It's not memorizing, it's just memorizing, just feeling confident. I know I have a good background. It makes the test easier. You feel better about taking it. You get a weird question, you won't panic as much. You're going to get who knows what kind of questions. That's the fun of standardized tests, isn't it? It just could be on anything. It kind of is, and you're going to everyone. As I understand it, they're going to give 2 sets of essay questions again. So you'll get whatever one you get. But if you get a multiple choice or you get a DBQ and the questions about the events leading up to the Civil War, and you've gone through that review list, asked questions, you'll be ready for it. In fact, when you read the question, do a quick, now listen to this carefully, do a quick brainstorm list. 10 or 15 things that would trigger a memory. Thank you. You gotta let me know this is a would-be assassin in here. This could have been a shiv, people. Oh yeah, you're watching my back. Very good. Oh, he had a bunch of passes. That's what IC would do.
Don't you know paper cuts can kill?
Thank you.
I mean, I think the party just keep going in my office.
That part. Listen though. Do a brainstorm list very quickly. Trigger your memories. It allows you to put it into context. Don't read your documents until you do a brainstorm list. So you know some background. So the documents aren't just thrown out a bunch of words. Oh yeah, okay, the Civil War. I remember the Kansas-Nebraska Act. I remember the Fugitive Slave Act. Things like that. So you have that background information. Do a brainstorm list. Same thing for your other essay. Do a brainstorm list. And you need evidence. And lastly, and I want to repeat this, context is a really important part of the essays for this test. In that opening paragraph, you need context. Do not do a little description about what you're going to write in your essay. That will get you nothing in this. In fact, I think it makes it a weak essay. Put down the events that led up to it. If you're going to talk about the events that led up to the Civil War, talk about in your opening paragraph a sentence on manifest destiny, the Industrial Revolution, the system of slavery in the South. Put down facts and information that are not in your body paragraph. So even if you're not 100% sure of the causes of the, it's kind of fuzzy, put down things that aren't in your body paragraph. Put down facts and information. If you get that, a good thesis, you've got 2 points right there on both essays. 2 points. Then all you need to do is describe 3 documents. Or describe 3, and then you can do those 3 and 1 other. Explain how it relates to your thesis. That's 2 more points. Yeah.
So how long do we get?
How long do you get? About a month.
Long as it.
The long essay.
It's not.
I have it right here. The timing, you will have 55 minutes for the multiple choice. I don't think that'll be a problem. 40 minutes for the short answer questions. A 10-minute break where that you can't talk to anybody, that you have to go stand in the corner and stare and feel shame. No, 10-minute break. And then you have a total of an hour, or where's this at? You have a total of an hour and 10 minutes, where you have supposedly, they allot 15 minutes to plan, but they don't say, this is your plan for it. They say, we're giving you 15 minutes to plan, 35 minutes for the long essay, 60 minutes for the DBQ. But it's one full block of time, so you use it any way you want. But you go. They allot 15 minutes for plan, 60, 35. Okay.
So long as it didn't feel like the same.
Yeah, it's all in the same block. You have one block of an hour and 10 minutes. But they say, we want you to use 15 minutes of that. You don't need to plan that whole time. You plan in 5 minutes as well. Yeah, same exact 2 pieces of evidence, but now instead of, so we're doing it just like a short idea. So your body paragraphs are topic sentence, brief summary, give 2 examples, explain why it's important. 4 to 5. But you have to have 4. Hey, I'm giving very good advice here. 4 examples of evidence. So that could be, you could have 2 per paragraph, so that could be 4 paragraphs, or you can hedge your bets and do 1 extra paragraph. All right. Any other questions? Any other questions? All right, let's go. Did we get to the YouTube?
Yes.
Did we get a shot down?
Yeah, we talked about Francis ran how it ended, or show me the how it down how it ended.
See a separated shoulder? I will tell you the story about this after this. It's a pretty good story, about a 5-minute story, but I'm going to move on. Ended the chance of peace talks. Everyone started blowing up atomic weapons again. That's when the Soviets would do the Tsar bomb. The threat of Cold War was actually greater than any other time previous. The threat of, nuclear war, and then in 1960. And then the Cuban Revolution happened. This actually been going on for a decade and a half. There was a revolt against, at first, the American-supported dictator. He's right here, Varela Batista. In fact, he was incredibly corrupt and brought in organized crime. They built a bunch of casinos in Havana. So the American mafia came in. Batista was so corrupt that the Eisenhower administration actually started cutting back aid in '57 because they thought he was just pocketing the money, which he was. The leader of the rebellion was a young lawyer by the name of Fidel Castro. And here's Castro right here. And Castro, we're not exactly sure exactly what he was at this time, but he was certainly a nationalist. And his big thing was he wanted land reform. Remember that for Guatemala. And he wanted to kick out the mob and talk democracy. Once again, he could have been a lot of things. We're not 100% sure because stuff would get in the way. Well, the rebellion lost every battle and won the war. On New Year's Eve in 1958, Castro, after losing all the time and hiding in the hills, marched on Havana, and Batista's army literally just ran away. And he marched in on New Year's Day, 1969, and it's victory. Just shocked everybody. And that's how corrupt the Batista regime would be, much like Chiang Kai-shek, it just collapsed. And so with Castro in power, immediately the United States began to suspect, especially once he said land reform, that he is, of course, a communist. Here's Nixon meeting him right after he spoke at the UN in 1960. Nixon was vice president. And Nixon came out saying he's either very competent or he's totally indoctrinated by communism. And then Nixon would say, and he's not incompetent. Now, we don't know if he was how much of a communist socialist. He was probably a moderate socialist without a doubt. But the United States began to cut off aid. Here he is appearing on the Ed Sullivan show, which I find just great. The same show that Elvis appeared on in 1960. But this would push him towards the Soviet Union, and the same guys who did Guatemala and Iran and other places. They did a similar thing in the Congo. They did a similar thing in Indonesia. We just aren't going to talk about all of them. They began to plan to remove Castro. And he was pushed closer to the Soviet Union and therefore inside that bloc. And so here's a picture of him with Khrushchev, and also a picture of him in New York City with a bunch of kids with fake Castro beards, which I thought was kind of wonderful. I think some of them might have actually grown those beards to be with him, but I don't know. I'm not involved. The science is a little confusing for me. But Castro would be a big issue in the election of 1960, thus would begin the 60s in the most dangerous time of the Cold War, when Eisenhower wanted to end the Cold War. And anybody know what that is? Picture of? That's the Vietnam Memorial, which is incredibly controversial when it was built, because it's supposed to look like from the air a knife gash into the ground, which in many ways Vietnam would be like that to the United States. But the election of 1960. So the Democrats nominated John Fitzgerald Kennedy, JFK. Hey, they're all copying FDR. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the young and relatively inexperienced senator from Massachusetts. He would be the youngest man ever elected president, not the youngest man to ever become president. Who was the youngest man to ever become president? Who? Yeah, Teddy Roosevelt. Quite good. And his policy, and he picked, this is done a lot, the vice presidential pick would balance out the ticket. So we had a young northern liberal Democrat from Massachusetts. And so they asked the experienced, not a heck of a lot older, but incredibly experienced Senate Majority Leader from Texas, Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ. And everyone was shocked Lyndon Johnson took this, because the Senate Majority Leader has a lot of power. The Vice President does nothing, except break ties in the Senate and wait for the President to die. LBJ hated being Vice President. His program was called the New Frontier. So it was to finish the New Deal, fair deal. And he might not have been as liberal economically as, let's say, FDR Kennedy or FDR Truman, but he was very liberal. And they really pushed the fact that he was a war hero. He commanded a patrol boat called the PT boat, which actually sunk. It was sunk, and he was a hero, saving, rescuing members of his crew. So they really pushed. It was called PT Patrol Torpedo Boat, PT 109. The Republicans nominated a man who was very close to the same age, but had an extensive background, Richard Nixon. Nixon was a vice president, and he made a name for himself red baiting. He was known for dirty tricks as a campaigner. He was called Tricky Dick. But he tried to reinvent himself. Calm down, people. He tried to reinvent himself as a different kind of politician. But he always had this reputation of being a brutal politician. I'm just happen to look up and all the tumbleweeds blowing. I love the 30-mile-per-hour winds. Back to this. Now, one thing, he's going to be saddled with being vice president for Eisenhower. So he is going to be blamed for losing Cuba, like the United States had Cuba to blame, just like the Democrats were blamed for losing China. Now, he lost Cuba. And the Democrats used this just like the Republicans did. But the big thing, what was the satellite that the Soviets launched? because of Sputnik, the Democrats pushed this idea of a missile gap. That because clearly the Soviets are having rockets, they now have more long range called intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, that could hit the United States from their launch sites in the Soviet Union. And they've allowed so many, because of the Eisenhower-Nixon administration's incompetence, they've allowed for the Soviets to have a huge advantage in missiles. And I know a lot of you are thinking, but I want to make up models of these missiles. Yes, you can buy. These are nuclear missiles, ICBMs and SLBMs, submarine launched ballistic missiles, from the 1980s. You can buy this model kit and make it. Who's thinking, wow, pretty exciting. That's called a Satan rocket. But moving on. And so Kennedy could portray himself as the liberal, but the Cold Warrior. He will fight the Cold War. The Republicans and their new look and brinksmanship had failed miserably. Was there a missile gap? Was there a big gap between the difference of ICBMs? A massive gap. Yes, exactly. The United States had not only 300 shockingly dangerous ICBMs like this liquid-fueled Atlas missile, and the U.S. was about ready to make a very stable, solid-fueled Minuteman missile. Guess where they'll put those Minutemen? The first ones will be right by Great Falls. The United States also had 500 medium range and intermediate range rockets in Turkey and Greece. Turkey and Italy, that could reach almost every part of the Soviet Union, and the United States had over 1,000 long-range bombers. Issues. How many missiles, ICBMs, did the Soviets have? 2. No, they had a lot more than that. They had 1 that could reach the United States from the Soviet Union on election day. And it took like 2 days to fuel. Well, we're getting that. Yeah. I mean, by then it becomes just ridiculous. Then, soon it won't matter how many you have. But they started. So there was a missile gap. I should add, this freaked out the Soviets. Why are you saying this? We are way behind. And Khrushchev tried to end the Cold War, and as he saw it, it was United States treachery. Remember the U-2. Now, of course, things are obviously very complex. Well, this is also the first election where there's going to be debates. The first ever time that presidential candidates will debate. And this will be on national television. Now, I'll actually tell you the story about this after this, but I got to go move on here. But in these debates, image became more important than anything else. People saw on the television screen, Kennedy looked fit, vigorous, sounded good. His image looked like what people wanted as a president in 1960. Nixon looked sick, ill, like a sinister chipmunk, one reporter said. Now, he actually was recovering from a really bad knee infection. But Kennedy looked good. And it showed one thing, these debates, that image became more important than reality. Remember we talked about image way back when in 1840. Remember Tippecanoe and Tyler 2, the log cabin campaign? How they tried to portray, the Whigs tried to portray the image of a Jacksonian Democrat? I hope that sounds familiar. The log cabin campaign. 1896, McKinley could use the money to portray himself as stable over William Jennings Bryan's radical free silver. 1932, FDR sounded like people wanted him to president 32 on the radio, but now the television screen, it just screens will change everything. Kennedy looked like what people want and Nixon didn't. And that would be decisive in this election. I should add, Kennedy was actually the one who was really sick. Kennedy nearly died while he was a senator. He was so ill. He was suffering from Addison's disease, and the only way he could function was a cocktail of steroids, amphetamines, and barbiturates. He was on this whole, basically I was going to say like a drug cabinet full of pharmaceuticals to keep him going. But he looked good. He was really ill. And they kept it secret and acted like somebody who might die tomorrow. He was actually given the last rites 4 different times in his life. The last time obviously would be the last. But he nearly died that many times. So image mattered, and it was enough. You want to see an ad for Kennedy?
Yeah.
Want to see one quick Kennedy ad? You want to see it? All right, here we go.
Hey.
I lied. Come on, sing along. You want to see a Kennedy ad? Let's see if you can guess who this ad is for. Yes. It's like 4 minutes long. We're not going to watch the whole. And our politics. Moving on. When the election happened, it was a very close election. Very close. But I'll get to it in a second. It was a very close election. Kennedy won the popular vote, not by a lot, won the popular vote, but remember, that doesn't matter. This is the United States of America. We don't have democratic elections for president. We have elections in every single state for the Electoral College. And so Kennedy won a little bit more in the Electoral College. You'll notice now we have 50 states. Alaska and Hawaii became the last 2 states. 11 years later, the Constitution would be amended to allow the District of Columbia 3 electoral votes. They don't have a member of the Senate or the House, but they have 3 electoral votes. So that's where we are today. 51 elections in every state for their electors, and then that decides the president. And you'll also notice it's a close election. And the Nixon campaign would say there was some voting shenanigans in the Chicago Democratic machine, and the Democrats would say, well, you did the same thing in Southern Illinois, the Republicans did. Who knows? But you'll notice this. A few of the electors in the South voted for the segregationist Harry Byrd. Kennedy came out for civil rights. That was part of the New Frontier. And so Southern Democrats were furious, and they just voted for Byrd, even though he technically was not running for president. And so this shows how the Democratic Party was dividing. You can see it pretty clear here. Look at these states. There was no real Republican Party in those states, but they voted against Kennedy because of civil rights. And so Kennedy's elected president. Pretty close. I should say Texas voted overwhelmingly for Kennedy, even though they were very much opposed. The Democratic Party in Texas, the mainstream party was pretty much opposed to civil rights, but Lyndon Johnson was for civil rights. So Eisenhower, when he left office, fearful of what had happened, especially because of the destruction of the Paris Peace Summit, gave his farewell address. Now, there are 2 farewell addresses that have been on the AP exam. One is Washington, where he warned against political parties and foreign entanglements. The other is Eisenhower, where he looked at the danger of the Cold War and the defense spending and warned of a military-industrial complex. And this is his comment of it. We must guard against this. So basically, it's a cabal or a group of arms manufacturers, military manufacturers, the military itself, and politicians, all unified to exaggerate foreign threats. In the Cold War, it's going to be communism. Afterwards, it could be like China or Russia or terrorism, to exaggerate the threat so they spend more on the military. So profits, they give their money to politicians who push the Cold War. The military, hey, more generals, more admirals if you beef up the army. And so he warned against this arms race and said this might lead us to war if we continue to increase defense spending. Did anyone listen to Eisenhower? Not really, no. This was always one that people might say, oh, we're worried about the industrial military complex, but we got to stop the communists. We need to build weapons we will never use. Remind me to tell you about the M60 tanks. So, this is his farewell address. And so there are two they might be on the test. Could be. They've been on before. Also, this is a good thing to talk about the Cold War. This is a great little tidbit. This is a great little bit of outside information. If there's going to be an essay question, anything on the Cold War. So, Kennedy's program, The New Frontier. And there's a lot of issues with the frontier, but it's basically three main elements. Civil rights. So he proposed to end Jim Crow, just like Truman did. Medicare. Now, he couldn't do health care for everybody. That was seen as politically impossible. But health insurance for the elderly, because health insurance or health costs for the elderly is significantly higher for anybody else on average, for obvious reasons. But he also proposed massive increases in defense spending. Unlike Eisenhower's nuclear-oriented new look, it's going to be flexible response and focus more on conventional, non-nuclear weapons. And one more thing, coin. Counterinsurgency. To train American forces to not just fight, but to train other countries to fight insurgencies in places like South Vietnam. And Kennedy loved this kind of stuff. He loved this new part of the United States Army called Special Forces. He loved it. He thought that was the coolest thing ever. He'd go down to Fort Bragg where they trained. Everybody copies the French when it comes to the military. These Special Forces wear Green Berets, so they're called Green Berets. And he loved that. He loved CIA. He loved spy stuff. He was really into that. And all of these failed, all but one. In fact, virtually everything Kennedy proposed failed. Kennedy was not able to get things through Congress. He was not good at the give and take of actually what politics really are, getting things done. Now, there was a guy next to him who was good at getting things done, but he was the vice president. And what do vice presidents do? Yeah, they shoveled him away, and LBJ was miserable for 3 years. Gaining 100 pounds, then losing 100 pounds, then gaining 100 pounds, and losing 100 pounds. He had issues. Yes, he would die of a heart attack. But moving on. What was the only thing that succeeded? No. Kennedy didn't get close on civil rights. The largest defense increase in American history, peacetime defense increase, would happen under John Kennedy. Until 1981. The United States dramatically increased the size of the military. And so Kennedy's only success, and therefore his really whole campaign when he ran for re-election, was Cold War and defense spending. That was everything. It was all defense spending. That's all the thing he had. Civil rights was a disaster for him. He didn't know how to push it, and it made him look weak. So that's Kennedy. Kennedy's an interesting guy. And almost immediately, he was presented, even before he became president, with a plan by the Eisenhower administration that would be called the Bay of Pigs. And the Bay of Pigs would be an invasion of Cuba. They would try to do the same thing they did in Guatemala. They would train an exile army of Cubans from the Batista regime in Guatemala. No way. The Armas regime let the CIA in to train this. It was going to be an exile attack. The U.S. had nothing to do with it, but of course the CIA was running it secretly, provided them with planes, equipment, even ships. And they would invade southern Cuba at a bay called the Bay of Pigs, trigger an uprising against the tyrant Castro. Kennedy was given this plan. He reluctantly agrees, but he didn't like it because it wasn't his plan. And it failed beyond comprehension. It failed so bad that looking back at it, it is almost ridiculous they tried. They landed in a horrible area. The army was ill-equipped. Heck, half of them were literally convicts. And here's Castro at the invasion. The people rallied to Castro. Castro was, and still is, shockingly popular in much of Cuba. The reason why, remember the Platt Amendment and the Spanish-American War. The United States had been dominating Cuba, and Castro stood up against it. Now, Castro did some things that were totalitarian, authoritarian, cruel, but he fought back against the United States. So it's going to be this weird kind of dichotomy with Castro, who's obviously since passed away. JFK was told, oh, like the moment the invasion started, it wasn't going to work. And they said, please use the Navy and Marines and finish the invasion. He refused. He refused to, I was going to put down use U.S. forces. I forgot use. I think I started writing U.S., and that's close enough to use, right? You can kind of just add, you can figure it out. And I should add the CIA was furious. Kennedy was furious at the CIA. He was given a bad plan. And the reason why is Kennedy didn't know how Iran, by all rights, should have failed. By all rights, Guatemala should have failed. These guys didn't have a clue what they were doing, and they proved it at the Bay of Pigs. But he was humiliated. And many thought, is he weak, soft on communism? So he's desperate to prove he's not soft. I should add, it was this moment, he blamed the CIA. And he won't let the CIA leadership do this again. He fired the previous head of the CIA, Alan Dulles, kept him off in the Eisenhower administration because of the Bay of Pigs. Kennedy still liked the operations, but he wanted more control. And you get it, the exploding Cuban cigar. He liked to smoke cigars, get it, get it. And so there's a myth that is developed, and many people believe to this day, that if Kennedy would not have been assassinated, he would have not got the United States involved in the Civil War in South Vietnam fully. And that, no, there's no evidence of that. It's unimaginable that he wouldn't have, because he's going to spend the rest of his presidency trying to prove he's tough on communism. It's just unimaginable. Anyways, back to this. So there was a summit 2 months later in Vienna with Khrushchev and Kennedy. Khrushchev is still mad about the U2, and he was going to browbeat that president, that young Kennedy, who ever thought Kennedy was a lightweight, kind of a playboy. You know, kind of was. But Kennedy wanted to prove he was tough. And the summit ended disastrously as both sides walking out angry at each other. And so the United States, actually, this is when we would test our 20 megaton nuclear bomb. It became, we're going to show how tough we are. The big issue, though, wasn't Cuba. It wasn't South Vietnam or Laos, which everyone talked about then. It was Berlin. Berlin, something was called the brain drain. Young people in the East were going to East Berlin. The borders were wide open. They were going to East Berlin, and then they were just crossing over and going west. You could just cross back and forth. There was no restrictions on East and West Berlin. We remember, which is in the middle of the Soviet zone, aka now the country of East Germany. And Khrushchev was like, you got to stop this. Khrushchev is trying to save this system. How can you say the Soviet system is working if everybody's leaving? Now, Kennedy thought he was trying to browbeat him over West Berlin. Khrushchev is getting desperate. He's trying to make this system, which is kind of starting to fade, work after the years of totalitarianism and war. So there were people who, especially like elderly people who had retired on a pension, they lived in West Germany. They would get an apartment in East Germany, East Berlin, because it was cheaper. Or you would see people, you know, they would, you know, hey, it's really expensive to live in West Berlin. Get an apartment in East Berlin, just cross over. There was no restriction. The borders were wide open. And that, Khrushchev decided, I have to act. And so East Germany did it, but obviously the Soviets were behind it. The Berlin Wall would be quickly constructed in August of 1961. So East German border guards put leg-bound barbed wire, put up a quick, see the barbed wire right here, quick cinder block wall, and then later a reinforced cement wall. Boom, now they divided it. And soon, West Berlin became this island surrounded by barbed wire, mines, and a wall. And you could see West Germans looking over And there were families divided, and some lived on other, or one lived on one side of the border, others didn't. This guy with his sunglasses was discovered by 2 AP photographers, and they took like 40 pictures of this East German officer, this guy with the sunglasses. So he became synonymous with the East German army. But I've seen people today, because people are clueless sometimes, and say, look at this Nazi officer. Don't be dumb. Okay, so they're not Nazis. They're communists. Well, actually, they're more totalitarian, but people saw this as perhaps Soviet aggression. They're going to surround West Germany to take it. Could this be an act of war? Oh, here it is. See him holding a little boy. He's talking to his grandma. Because the wall split. They couldn't get back and forth. They greatly restricted, therefore. Now, a U.S. citizen could cross. You have to go through a checkpoint. But Germans couldn't until you're actually, they would eventually allow for people of retirement age to go. That's a German border guard, East German border guard making a break for it to the west. That's in 1971. It's a good, famous picture. But in reality, this is Soviet desperation. The Soviets have real trouble. If you got to build a wall to keep your people in, there's issues. You have issues. You know, the people, they might have accepted the depredations in the 1930s, thinking this is going to make a great Soviet state, but after years of war, they wanted a better life, and they weren't getting it. And so, even though there would be a number of times, a couple different times, where it looked like war might break out, there's Soviet tanks and American tanks in West Berlin. This is the U.S. occupation zone, and so my wife's sister married a Berliner. Her son came to class in January. But he grew up in the American occupation zone. They called it the Temple Office. So, I guess be my brother-in-law. But they told stories about him peeking over the wall, and they yelled insults at the East German border guards, so they drew their guns out. He's a little crazy. But moving on. But this actually led to a much more stable situation. Now, Kennedy would go to Berlin in 1962 and give one of his most famous speeches, where he basically made it clear that the United States will consider West Berlin like it's part of the United States. And if West Berlin is attacked, we will defend. This became a big issue. Got to be a credible defense to Western Europe. We were really worried at this time. Looking back, it seems ridiculous, but really worried that these Western nations might leave NATO. There was no chance of that, but we were worried about it. So Kennedy gave this speech. Here he is giving it, and he announced, I'm a Berliner, and did it very colloquial German. And so here it is on his note card. You can go through and have his note cards. In his handwriting, he got from the mayor of Berlin, Willy Brandt, told him how to phonetically say this. So it's to say in German, Ich bin ein Berliner. So you can say it close to German. Just saying very colloquially, casually, I'm a Berliner. I'm like you. He said at the beginning and the end, the crowd went nuts. Now, I should add one thing. Berliner is also the name of a jelly donut. And so a lot of people have come, the joke is that Kennedy didn't know what he was saying and actually said he was a jelly donut, and the people in West Berlin laughed at him for calling himself a jelly donut. No, everybody knew what he meant. They did not. But people say that to this day. And so the very first time I was in Berlin, I was out alone walking around the Unter den Linden in downtown Berlin. I went to a little store, and I saw this sticker. And it's a jelly donut saying, Ich bin ein Berliner. So you can say, a jelly donut saying I'm a Berliner, cost me €150, right there. And I know I got to put it on something, but I got to keep it and save it. When I retire, it's going to go on something. So this led to an uneasy stalemate. And what's the other picture a former student made? The stalemate, and that became the symbol of the Cold War. Oh yeah. I had a very good artist as a student a while back. She made a jelly donut with Kennedy's face saying, Ich bin ein Berliner. I got to take a picture of that and put that up. She was very good. Well, and I love this side. This is the West Berlin side with all the graffiti on. But that became the symbol of the Cold War. And so when the Berlin Wall came down, and I still vividly remember November 9th, 1989, when the Berlin Wall came down, that would be the symbolic end of the Cold War. That became the symbol of it, this Berlin Wall. So while this is going on, Kennedy decided to take care of Castro. And so they began a covert CIA and others led operation called Operation Mongoose to assassinate Castro. And they did all kinds of secret plans. Now, Kennedy did not trust the CIA. So he had, and this is mind-boggling because this is violating about 30 federal laws, US government laws. He had the Attorney General of the United States run this. The Attorney General, which is also a shocking bit of nepotism, was Kennedy's brother, Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy. This is mind-boggling looking back at it, but they did all kinds of things. Everything from efforts to have exploding seashells to, I'll tell you the whole story about it after the test. They even tried to put an exploding cigar into his collection of cigars. They even tried to get a mistress to kill him when he went to the United Nations in '62. Yeah. He was Attorney General, which I can't mean to have the Attorney General as the brother of the president is mind-boggling. But he even used the mafia. Here's members of the Genovese family. And they were mad at Castro because he kicked Castro, they kicked the mob out of Havana. I should add this would be Vegas's big boom, when they begin to open up and really expand the casinos in Las Vegas because they got kicked out of Havana. Now, most Americans had no idea this was going on. Who knew? Castro. Castro knew they're trying to kill me. They are trying to kill me. They've invaded. They're trying to end me. We had all kinds of plans, even to hijack a plane. Say it's Cubans that hijacked it and then fly it into like a big building in Miami. That whole thing about hijacking using planes, and people acted like that was a surprise on September 11, 2001. It was not a surprise. We had known about that tactics, and we have actually stopped certain groups from doing that in 1999. Anyways, back to this. Both Castro and Khrushchev felt very weak at this moment, and they had no way to deter an American attack. So now they're coming together. By the way, that's an actual copy of Mad Magazine from 1963 with Castro with an exploding cigar. They had no idea that they actually tried to do this. I'll tell you that story too later. But what is this going to lead to? The Cuban Missile Crisis. 14 days were publicly, this is the most dangerous time publicly in the Cold War history, where for days it looked like the world was on the edge of nuclear war. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I turned it. So October 14th through the 28th. How did they move that far? And this is one of my favorite cartoons. So you notice Kennedy with a wire to an H-bomb and Khrushchev sitting on it. Khrushchev with a wire to the H-bomb that Kennedy's sitting on. And their fingers are on the buttons. So everyone get the image of that. And they're arm wrestling over Cold War politics on the edge of destroying each other. And I should add, they're so close, you destroy one, you destroy the other. So everyone get the point of that. But here's the amazing thing. Look at they're arm wrestling. What happens if Kennedy wins that arm wrestling? Bang! It's the button. Meaning, it's just a winnable war. Yeah, there's no one going to win this. It's a very clever cartoon. Very clever. Well, on the 12th, U-2 picked up, and on the 14th, the United States confirmed that the Soviets were building intermediate range and medium range missile sites because they felt very vulnerable to all the American missiles and the American buildup. Now, these missiles, the medium range missiles, could hit Washington, D.C. in less than 10 minutes. The intermediate range could hit most of the continental United States and Canada. And so overnight, the United States became vulnerable like it was never before, except for, in campaign ads. Well, no American president could allow this. This is intolerable. Can you imagine going to the people in 1964 and saying we allow and saying, hey, it's not that big of a deal that there's Soviet missiles on Cuba. The Republicans would crucify him. So what were his options? Well, they talked about invasion. There are Marines training for it right there. The problem with invasion is what's going to happen to Berlin? Won't the Soviets, couldn't they just potentially swallow up West Berlin? It's right there. Okay, what about airstrikes? Well, airstrikes, they weren't that accurate. Could this quickly escalate? What if they missed? What if someone launched a missile? How quickly could this expand? Diplomacy was seen as too slow and weak. Even though Kennedy was actually going to meet with the foreign minister of the Soviet Union, Gromyko, after this happened, they kept it secret. Probably foolishly looking back. Kennedy's back was so bad from World War II, he always had to sit in a rocking chair. He was on painkillers still. Big, heavy back brace. He was a mess. But he looked young, fit, and vigorous, didn't he? So what they decided was a blockade. Now, blockade's an act of war, so they called it a quarantine, and said no Soviet ships will be allowed in. At first, they put down about 200 miles, and then they said 100 miles. Here's a Soviet ship with American reconnaissance plane. They knew Soviet ships were on their way to Cuba, freighters. And they were convinced some of these had missile components. Who knows what else they had? As it turned out, a lot. And then on the night of the 22nd, Kennedy announced it on national TV. And this hit the world like a shockwave, like an earthquake. No one had any idea. All of a sudden, boom, we're on the edge of nuclear war. Boom, we're going to quarantine and potentially fight on the open sea. Who knows what's going to happen? Overnight, they told people to prepare for nuclear war. They told cities all over the West. That meant the US, Canada, Western Europe, Japan, Australia, all our American allies, test your sirens, test your fallout shelters, and the next time you hear it, it's the real thing. All over, they told people that. And people started preparing for national defense and stockpiling food. This led to absolute panic. I love this picture of everyone in the TV shop watching the president. Here, see all the grocery carts? They went through and just cleaned out grocery stores. Here, this was in one of these public or national defense little books, how to make a little fallout shelter in your backyard by digging a hole and covering it with doors. Stay in there for 2 weeks. That brand new symbol for fallout shelters, everyone said, know where your nearest fallout shelter was? Because I remember being a kid, always looking up for the fallout shelter. Ah, the fun of the Cold War. You want to see panic, though. Look what happened even in people's homes. It was absolute panic. I would have paid anything to actually see that in real life. But on the 24th, the first Soviet ships arrived at the blockade line. It looked like there might be firing on the open seas. And we nearly blew the world up right there. I'll tell you that story after the exam. But the Soviet ships stopped, and now they're stalemate. Over the next 4 days, 4 or 5 different times, the world just about was destroyed. And you wouldn't have to worry about the APUSH. Don't yay that. Of course, you probably wouldn't have been around. But moving on. But then on the 28th, a secret agreement was met. The U.S. agreed not to invade Cuba. The Soviets agreed to pull the missiles out. Now, to many Americans, this was especially more Cold War and more conservative foreign policy-wise, this was seen as another Munich. In secret, the U.S. said they would remove those. They were obsolete. They're going to remove them anyways, but those missiles from Turkey and Italy. And so the world had pulled back from the brink of nuclear war. I will tell you the stories after the exam of how close it was. You will not believe how close it was. Now, this is not the closest we came to nuclear war. One fun night in 1979, we were about maybe 2 minutes from blowing the world up. All I got to say is, I'm glad I was blissfully asleep. I have no idea. For the submarine here, that's 79 something. Yeah, that's Yeah, that's true, yeah. No. Goodbye, everybody. I will tell you everything you need to know on page 11. I promise. I am good people.
Blue rice, Isle of the Dogs, and what else?
Who's your shirt?
It was my first Taylor Swift.
Who's that?
You really know how to do? I went to her concert.
Oh, well, good. I've heard. Was there anybody else there?
Yeah, just a couple.
I don't know any Taylor Swift songs. I know nothing about Taylor Swift, except that she is shockingly popular. For me, the paper, where was it?
It was saved to like a weird spot that like wouldn't show up on my
Thank you that you found.
laptop. Yeah, I was gonna have to redo it.
We would have figured something, but yeah. I mean, yeah. I would have given you a lot of time, but yeah.
I'll give you a Taylor Swift presentation after.
Huh?
I'll give you a Taylor
Yeah,
Swift
we'll
presentation.
do it in July.
What do we?
Partridge.
Do you like take
Shut down.
We'll finish up any loose ends. We'll get the final.
Someone skipping the dotting.
So I got a couple of more certain things I need to do a few notes. And then, so for final week, we won't have to.
I can do that.
That'll be easy. Huh? Oh, yeah, sure, yeah. Hold on. Let me see, yeah. It took me a second.
It's got a big block from a Corvette. Hold on.
You get that, I gotta do something really quick. Oh, you gotta do my lunch?
I would.
Your form was great. You guys did really well. We'll all look at it in a sec. What's that? Yeah, they're the best. Doesn't mean late work. Awesome. What year is it? Those are good picks. Those things will last forever. And the engines, I mean, they're not like the new ones. You can just keep fixing those. And,
Yeah.
yeah, they're great.
200,000 miles and still going. So.
That's really cool.
I want to get a 4. If I get a 2, I'll be. I better get a 5 on my.
Like you, good job.
Yeah, I'm surprised it didn't work too.
Nice. You're getting it.
No.
Oh, okay. First one a little harder.
I didn't write one after another, so the second one I was like.
That's the problem. Even if you know it, your mind is tired. Yeah, I understand. Looks really good. Think about, and the big thing is just see the question.
Yeah.
That's the only reason I'm making you do this. Very good. Say no. One of the tests I found, the 2019 is a little bit easier than 2019 too. That's what I would say. All right, everybody, let's get to work. Everyone say goodbye to television land.